What in the living hell do you think you're doing? The shrill voice cut through the dull thud of my shovel hitting compacted earth, instantly silencing the urban hum around me. I straightened up, wiping a streak of sweat and dirt from my brow, with the back of my glove, to face the inevitable. There she stood, perfectly coiffed, impeccably dressed even for a Tuesday afternoon, hands planted firmly on her hips, a scowl etched onto her face that could curdle milk. Karen, her name itself, seemed to carry the weight of neighborhood grievances. This is an absolute disgrace. It's an eyesore. My property value is plummeting faster than your sense of civic responsibility. Her voice, usually reserved for passive-aggressive comments about overgrown hedges, was now a full-blown assault, echoing across the half-acre of what had once been an abandoned, rubbish-strewn lot, now transformed into my personal, glorious, incredibly messy battlefield. For weeks, this neglected patch of land, sandwiched between the forgotten back alleys and the pristine suburban lawns, had been my sanctuary, my obsession, my colossal secret. It was a canvas of neglect, choked with weeds, littered with discarded tires, broken furniture, and the ghosts of forgotten dreams. Acquiring access had been a Herculean task, navigating bureaucracy and wary city officials who saw only legality where I saw possibility. But I had persevered, fueled by a vision that burned brighter than the midday sun. And now, this vision, in its nascent, chaotic form, was directly clashing with the meticulously ordered world of people like Karen. "Good afternoon, Karen," I offered, trying to keep my tone even, though my muscles ached and my patience was wearing thin. "Just working on a little project." The phrase felt utterly inadequate to describe the monumental effort involved. Around me lay the evidence of that effort, mounds of dark, nutrient-rich topsoil I'd managed to secure, contrasting starkly with the pale, sandy original earth, stacks of reclaimed wooden pallets waiting to be repurposed, newly dug trenches snaking across the uneven ground, hinting at future irrigation lines, and a growing pile of removed debris, sorted meticulously into recyclables and true waste. To my eyes, it was the raw, beautiful chaos of creation. To Karen's, it was an abomination, a little project. She scoffed, her eyes wide with theatrical horror. "It looks like a disaster zone, the noise, the dust. My azaleas are covered in this this filth. Do you have any idea what this is doing to the aesthetic of the street? People are talking. You know, they're worried." She gestured wildly at the neat row of houses lining the street, their perfect lawns and blooming flower beds a stark contrast to my burgeoning wilderness. "This isn't some rural wasteland. This is a residential neighborhood. Who gave you permission for this? Are you even licensed for this kind of demolition?" Demolition? The word stung. What she saw as destruction, I saw as groundwork, the painful but necessary act of clearing space for something vital. I wanted to tell her, to shout about the dozens of carefully selected seed packets tucked away in my shed, the detailed blueprints for raised garden beds, the intricate plans for composting systems, and the grand design for a vibrant, productive space. I wanted to explain that the noise was the sound of progress, the dust the byproduct of reclaiming forgotten earth, and the filth a temporary stage for transformation. But I couldn't, not yet. The element of surprise, the grand reveal, was crucial. It wasn't about catching Karen off guard. It was about presenting a fully realized solution, a self-sustaining haven, rather than an abstract concept. I managed a tight smile. "All permits are in order. Karen, it's just a lot of earth moving at the moment. It'll start to look better soon, I promise." It was a half-truth. The permits covered basic land clearing, not the specific nature of the project. And soon was a subjective term when you were building a dream from the ground up, largely alone, driven by passion and a handful of whispered promises. She squinted at me, clearly unsatisfied. "Better. I doubt it. This whole thing is an absolute eyesore. You're bringing down the whole neighborhood. I've already called the association. and the city. This isn't over. With one last indignant huff, she spun on her heel and marched back towards her pristine bungalow, leaving me standing amidst my beautiful mess, the echoes of her anger still hanging in the humid air. I sighed, leaning on my shovel, and looked out at the churning earth. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the freshly turned soil, revealing its rich, dark texture. I ran my gloved hand through it, feeling its potential. My eyes traced the rough outlines of what would soon be rows of vibrant green, the pathways that would guide weary feet, the benches where tired souls could rest. Over the past few weeks, during my solitary, back-breaking labor, I had occasionally caught glimpses of movement from the alleyway, a figure, sometimes two, pausing, watching with a quiet, almost reverent curiosity. They never approached, never spoke, but their presence was a silent acknowledgement, a subtle affirmation that I was on the right path. They were the reason for this mess, the silent beneficiaries of this arduous, misunderstood endeavor, and for them, every complaint, every ache, every ounce of sweat was worth it. This wasn't just a project, it was a promise. A promise slowly taking root in the heart of a mess that only I, for now, could truly see. The days bled into weeks, each one a relentless cycle of digging, hauling, and battling not just the stubborn earth, but the ever-escalating campaign waged by Karen. Her initial verbal tirades had morphed into a multi-pronged assault. First came the official-looking letter from the Neighborhood Association, citing unapproved land use modifications and disruption of community aesthetics, demanding an immediate cessation of work. I responded with copies of my basic land clearing permits, knowing full well they didn't cover the full scope of my ambition, but hoping to buy time. Then, the city council received a barrage of complaints, resulting in a visit from a weary-looking inspector who, after a cursory glance and a few mumbled questions, seemed more interested in avoiding Karen than in my mess. He left with a shrug, and a promise to look into it, which I took as a temporary reprieve. But Karen was relentless. I'd catch her on her porch, phone pressed to her ear, gesticulating wildly towards my plot, clearly detailing new grievances to unseen listeners. Once, I even saw a small, local community blog post titled "Neighborhood Nuisance. Residents upset over mysterious digging project," featuring a blurry photo of my site and a quote from an anonymous concerned resident that sounded suspiciously like Karen. The pressure was a constant hum beneath the surface of my exhaustion, annoying anxiety that threatened to derail everything, and exhaustion was a constant companion. The sheer physical toll of transforming this neglected patch was immense. One week, an unseasonable downpour turned the freshly tilled soil into a viscous, unworkable mud pit, setting me back days and making every step a struggle through ankle-deep sludge. The next, a heat wave descended, baking the earth into a concrete-like crust that defied my shovel, forcing me to work in the pre-dawn hours or late into the night, under the solitary glow of a work lamp, battling mosquitoes and the creeping shadows. Sourcing materials proved another unexpected hurdle. While I'd managed to secure a good deal on topsoil, finding enough durable, reclaimed wood for the raised beds was a scavenger hunt across construction sites and demolition zones, often requiring me to haul heavy, splintered planks in my beat-up truck, praying they wouldn't fall apart mid-journey. A critical shipment of irrigation tubing was delayed for days, then arrived incomplete, forcing me to improvise with spare garden hoses and a patchwork of connectors. My hands were a landscape of calluses and blisters, my back a perpetual ache, and there were nights I fell asleep on the couch, too tired to even make it to my bed, the scent of fresh earth clinging to my clothes like a second skin. The budget, too, was a tightrope walk. Every unexpected expense, every broken tool, chipped away at my dwindling savings, forcing me to become an expert in creative repurposing and bargain hunting. Yet, amidst the relentless physical labor and Karen's unyielding antagonism, there were moments, small and fleeting, that renewed my resolve. The subtle interactions with the silent observers from the alleyway were becoming less subtle, more frequent. What began as fleeting glimpses had evolved into a quiet, almost ritualistic, presence. I started recognizing faces: the older man with the weathered face, who always wore a faded baseball cap, the young woman with the backpack who often sat on an overturned bucket just out of sight, sketching in a worn notebook, the quiet, middle-aged man who carried a tattered blanket. They never approached directly, never spoke a word, but their eyes, when they thought I wasn't looking, held a profound curiosity, a glimmer of something akin to hope. Sometimes, I would leave a water bottle near the edge of the site, pretending to forget it, only to find it gone later, replaced by a small, smooth river stone or a perfectly intact, discarded bolt. Tiny, anonymous acts of reciprocity. One sweltering afternoon, as I struggled to lift a particularly heavy section of a reclaimed fence post, I glanced up to see the man in the baseball cap, his eyes fixed on my struggle. He didn't move, didn't offer to help, but his gaze felt like a silent cheer, a recognition of the effort, and it was enough to give me the strength to finish the task. These unspoken exchanges were a powerful counterpoint to Karen's vocal disdain, a silent affirmation that my mess was, in fact, creating something meaningful. It was for these quiet observers, for the dignity and sustenance I hoped to provide, that I pushed through the aches, ignored the complaints, and continued to pour every ounce of my being into transforming this desolate patch into a vibrant, life-giving space. The garden was slowly, painstakingly taking shape, its nascent form still obscured by the surrounding chaos, but its purpose, clear as day in my mind, drawing closer with every shovel of earth turned. The transformation, though still far from complete, was undeniable. What Karen still perceived as an ever-growing mess was, to my eyes, finally beginning to coalesce into something recognizable, something with form and purpose. The skeletal frames of the raised garden beds, once just stacks of reclaimed wood, now stood proudly in neat rows, filled with the rich, dark topsoil. The intricate network of irrigation lines, painstakingly laid and connected, snaked across the plot, promising life-giving water to the parched earth. I had even managed to erect a rudimentary, but sturdy, composting system in a far corner, its wooden walls already beginning to hold the promise of future nourishment. The most thrilling development, however, was the burgeoning green. Tiny, tender, sprouts of lettuce, spinach, radishes, and herbs had pushed their way through the soil, miniature flags of hope unfurling against the brown backdrop. Each new leaf, each delicate stem, was a silent defiance to Karen's complaints, a testament to the life I was coaxing from this neglected ground. The air, once heavy with the smell of dust and decay, now carried faint, earthy notes of damp, soil and nascent growth, but as the garden took shape, so too did Karen's fury. Her calls to the city had finally yielded a more serious response, a formal cease and desist order, plastered on a makeshift signpost at the edge of my property, citing unauthorized agricultural development in a residential zone and repeated neighbor complaints. It felt like a punch to the gut, a bureaucratic wall slamming down on my dreams. I spent an entire day on the phone, navigating endless automated menus and indifferent civil servants, trying to explain the nuance of a community garden versus agricultural development, but my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Karen, emboldened by this official backing, now felt justified in her daily harassment. She would stand at the edge of her lawn, a formidable sentinel, watching my every move, often with a pair of binoculars. Once, she even tried to physically block a delivery of gravel, demanding to see the driver's permits, until he, a burly man with little patience for suburban drama, simply drove around her. The whispers in the neighborhood grew louder, too. I overheard snippets of conversations. He's building some kind of farm back there. It's going to attract pests. What about the property values? Painting me a rogue element, a threat to their manicured tranquility. Yet, it was amidst this escalating external pressure that the most profound and unexpected development occurred. The silent observers from the alleyway began to emerge from the shadows. It started subtly. One morning, I found a small, rusted but perfectly functional trowel left beside my toolbox. Another day, a stack of old, clean newspapers appeared near the composting bin, perfect for layering. Then, during a particularly arduous afternoon of moving heavy rocks to create a border, I noticed the older man with the baseball cap, Pops as I'd mentally named him, slowly approaching. He didn't speak, but he picked up a rock, then another, and began placing them alongside me, his movements slow but deliberate. We worked in tandem for an hour, a silent ballet of shared labor, until the border was complete. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and then melted back into the alley. This was the beginning of our secret alliance. The young woman with the notebook, whom I learned was named Maya, started leaving small, hand-drawn diagrams, surprisingly accurate, for optimal sun exposure for certain plants, or efficient water flow. She had an uncanny eye for design. The quiet man with the tattered blanket, whose name was Leo, would often appear when I was struggling with a particularly heavy load, offering a strong, silent hand. He rarely looked me in the eye, but his presence was a comforting, reliable anchor. They were not just beneficiaries. They were collaborators, their knowledge of the streets, of resourcefulness, of quiet resilience, proving invaluable. We communicated, not with words, but with gestures, shared glances, and the unspoken understanding of a common purpose. They moved like shadows, appearing when needed, disappearing before anyone else could notice. Especially Karen, their involvement transformed the project from a solitary endeavor into a shared mission, infusing it with a deeper meaning and a quiet, powerful sense of community. This secret partnership, forged in the crucible of shared effort and mutual respect, became my shield against Karen's relentless attacks, a constant reminder of the true, vital purpose behind every shovel of earth turned, every seed planted, every complaint endured. The garden was no longer just my project, it was our project, a nascent beacon of hope slowly rising from the mess, its true form still hidden from the judgmental eyes of the world outside our quiet, growing alliance. The final week was a blur of frantic, exhilarating activity. The cease and desist order had been a wake-up call, a stark reminder that time was running out. Pops, Maya, and Leo, along with a few other quiet individuals they had brought in, worked tirelessly alongside me. The garden was no longer a secret project, it was a shared mission, a collective act of defiance against indifference. We painted the reclaimed wood of the raised beds in vibrant, earthy tones. We laid down a thick layer of wood chips on the pathways, transforming muddy tracks into neat, inviting roots. The irrigation system, finally complete, hummed softly as water flowed, quenching the thirst of the young plants that were now visibly thriving, their leaves a lush green against the dark soil. We built a simple, sturdy wooden sign, painted in bold, clear letters, the Oasis Community Garden, a place of growth, sustenance, and dignity for all. It was simple, direct, and left no room for misinterpretation. The mess was gone, replaced by order, beauty, and a profound sense of purpose. The day of the unveiling dawned bright and clear, almost as if the universe itself was blessing our endeavor. We hadn't planned a grand opening ceremony, fearing it would attract the wrong kind of attention too soon. Instead, it was a soft launch, a quiet invitation extended through the networks of the homeless community, and a few carefully chosen local advocates had discreetly contacted. Yet, as the morning progressed, a small crowd began to gather, not just the familiar faces of Pops, Maya, and Leo, but dozens of others, men and women, young and old, their faces etched with the hardships of life on the streets, but now alight with a hesitant hope. They walked among the rows, touching the nascent leaves, their eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and quiet reverence. The air was filled not with the clang of tools, but with soft murmurs of appreciation, the rustle of leaves, and the distant, happy chirping of birds. Then, she arrived, Karen. She strode onto the property, her posture rigid, her face a mask of triumphant indignation, a phone already pressed to her ear, presumably to the city or the neighborhood association. "I knew it," she declared, her voice cutting through the peaceful hum. "I knew this would be a permanent blight. Look at this. It's a farm, in the middle of our street. I'm reporting this immediately. You'll be shut down by lunch, I promise you that." She marched directly towards the newly erected sign, her finger already poised to dial, her eyes narrowed in a self-satisfied glare. But as her gaze fell upon the sign, her words faltered. Her eyes, initially scanning for evidence of continued mess or violations, widened slightly as she read. The bold lettering, "The Oasis Community Garden, .. she murmured, her voice losing some of its earlier vitriol, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Then, her eyes drifted past the sign, taking in the verdant rows, the neatly mulched paths, the small, smiling groups of people she would normally cross the street to avoid, gently tending to the plants, their faces radiating a quiet joy. She saw Pops carefully watering a tomato plant, Maya sketching in her notebook on a newly installed bench, Leo showing a younger man how to identify weeds. She saw the dignity, the purpose, the sheer, undeniable beauty of it all. The phone dropped from her hand, clattering onto the soft mulch. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to deflate slightly, her shoulders slumped, and the triumphant scowl on her face melted into a look of utter, profound shock. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The realization hit her like a physical blow. All her complaints, all her outrage, all her efforts to shut down what she perceived as a mess and a nuisance, had been directed at this. At a sanctuary, at a source of food and hope for the most vulnerable members of their community. The silence around her was deafening, broken only by the gentle rustling of leaves and the soft, appreciative murmurs of the garden's true beneficiaries. Her face, usually so composed, flushed a deep, mortified red. She looked around, her eyes darting from the flourishing plants to the faces of the homeless individuals, then to me, standing quietly by the entrance, a silent witness to her epiphany. The anger was gone, replaced by a raw, naked embarrassment, a dawning shame. A ripple went through the small crowd that had gathered. Neighbors, drawn by Karen's loud arrival, now stood at the periphery, their initial curiosity turning into gasps of admiration. "It's for them," someone whispered, their voice filled with awe. "He built this for the homeless." Another person pulled out their phone, not to complain, but to take pictures. Local news vans, alerted by a tip from one of the advocates, suddenly pulled up, cameras flashing, microphones extended. The story, once a local nuisance, was instantly transformed into a heartwarming tale of compassion and community. The air, which had been thick with Karen's judgment, now vibrated with a palpable sense of wonder and gratitude. The faces of Pops, Maya, and Leo, usually guarded, were open, beaming with pride and a deep, quiet joy. They were no longer just observers, they were the heart of this place, tending to the garden that was now truly theirs. Standing there, amidst the vibrant green and the soft hum of burgeoning life, I felt a profound sense of peace. All the aches, all the sleepless nights, all of Karen's relentless complaints, faded into insignificance. The mess had become a miracle, and the truth, finally unveiled, was more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. The Oasis Community Garden quickly blossomed into more than just a source of fresh produce. It became a vibrant, living testament to human connection and resilience. In the weeks and months following its unveiling, the initial shock and awe gave way to a steady, heartwarming rhythm of life. The raised beds, once filled with tentative sprouts, now overflowed with ripe tomatoes, crisp lettuce, fragrant herbs, and plump berries. The once barren plot was a riot of color and life, a true oasis in the urban landscape. For the homeless community, it was a lifeline. No longer dependent solely on soup kitchens or discarded scraps, They now had direct access to nutritious, organic food, a luxury many had forgotten. But the impact went far beyond mere sustenance. The garden became a classroom, a therapy session, a job training program all rolled into one. Pops, with his surprising knowledge of soil composition and plant cycles, became the unofficial head gardener, his withered hands now gently tending to delicate seedlings instead of just holding a cardboard sign. Maya, her notebook always at her side, meticulously documented plant growth, experimented with companion planting, and even started teaching basic literacy classes using seed packets and gardening guides as textbooks. Leo, the quiet force, organized the distribution of harvests, ensuring fairness and reaching out to those who were too shy or unwell to come to the garden themselves. They weren't just receiving, they were contributing, learning new skills, regaining a sense of purpose and dignity that the streets had long stripped away. The garden provided not just food for their bodies, but nourishment for their souls, a place where they were seen, valued, and belonged. The ripple effect extended far beyond the garden's borders. The neighborhood, initially divided by Karen's complaints, underwent a profound transformation. The curious whispers turned into admiring conversations. Residents, who had once eyed the mess with suspicion, now brought over bags of compost, donated gardening tools, or simply stopped by to offer words of encouragement. Children from nearby schools started visiting on field trips, learning about sustainable agriculture and empathy in equal measure. Local businesses, inspired by the garden's success, began offering small jobs to the homeless individuals who worked there, recognizing their newfound skills and dedication. The local news story went national, inspiring similar initiatives in other cities, turning the oasis into a blueprint for community-led change. The once forgotten alleyway became a symbol of hope, a vibrant hub where different worlds intersected, united by the simple act of growing food. The garden had not only transformed a piece of land, but had softened hearts, bridged divides, and cultivated a deeper sense of collective responsibility within the community. And then there was Karen. Her public humiliation on the day of the unveiling had been absolute. For weeks, she disappeared, her house remaining dark, her perfect lawn untended. The neighborhood gossiped, wondering if she had moved away in shame. But one crisp autumn morning, as I was harvesting the last of the season's squash, I saw her. She was standing at the edge of her lawn, not with binoculars or a phone, but with a small, hesitant basket in her hand. She approached slowly, her usual rigid posture replaced by a tentative uncertainty. I baked these, she mumbled, her eyes fixed on the ground, offering a plate of freshly baked cookies. For the gardeners, it wasn't an apology, not explicitly, but it was an offering, a small, fragile bridge. I took the cookies, warm and fragrant, and simply said, "Thank you, Karen, they look delicious." She nodded, a faint blush creeping up her neck. And then, to my astonishment, she asked, Do you need any help with the weeding? My azaleas are looking quite neglected these days, and I could use a new project." It was a small step, a tentative reach across the chasm of her own prejudice, but it was a step nonetheless. Karen never became a full-time gardener, nor did she ever publicly apologize for her past behavior, but she started leaving small donations of gardening supplies, and occasionally, I would see her watching from her porch, a different expression on her face, not anger, but a quiet, contemplative gaze, perhaps finally seeing the beauty in something that wasn't perfectly manicured. The Oasis Community Garden stands as a powerful reminder that true beauty often emerges from unexpected places, from the mess that others dismiss, from the dreams that seem impossible. It teaches us that compassion, when cultivated with dedication and resilience, can yield the most abundant harvest. It proved that a single act of kindness, even one born from a misunderstood project, can ripple outwards, transforming lives, fostering community, and inspiring a hopeful new beginning for all. The seeds planted in that once neglected lot grew, not just into food, but into a living legacy of empathy, proving that even the smallest patch of earth, when tended with love, can feed not just bodies, but souls.